The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind humid air and a soft scent that mixed with the breeze over the Arizona desert floor. Jack Thompson, 55 years old, was still struggling with a section of broken fence when a familiar sound of footsteps made him look up. It was Max, his 7-year-old German Shepherd, who had been missing for several hours, something very unusual since they both moved to that isolated property in the countryside. But what really stopped Jack's heart was what came behind the dog. Max had not returned alone. Covered in mud and soaked by the rain, Max was followed by two small brownish-yellow creatures. They were puppies, stumbling behind him, no more than 6 or 8 weeks old. They looked exhausted and frightened. "Heavens," exclaimed Jack, dropping his hammer. After 3 decades working in wildlife rescue centers, he recognized them instantly. They were purebred African lions, something extremely unusual in that region. Max stopped a few meters from Jack and looked at him with eyes that mixed fatigue and pride. The cubs immediately collapsed on the ground, panting with mud stuck to their delicate fur. Jack approached, but something unexpected happened. Max growled softly, a sound he had never directed at his owner. Then he positioned himself between Jack and the cubs, making his message clear. They were under his protection. Jack stepped back, observing the muddy tracks. Max must have followed a path that bordered the nearby creek, swollen by the recent storm. His experience told him that these cubs didn't belong there. Undoubtedly, they had come from far away and under unusual circumstances. With the sharp gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime among animals, Jack explored the surroundings looking for signs of a mother lioness or more animals. But he only found the whistle of the wind among the cholla bushes and the murmur of the nearby creek. The cubs, clearly lost or abandoned, had been found by Max. Jack opened the shed door, now converted into a workshop, and gestured to the dog. Surprisingly, the cubs seemed to understand and with difficulty stood up to follow Max inside. Without wasting time, Jack took out his phone and called Sarah Reeves, a former colleague at the Wildlife Protection Agency. When he finished telling her what had happened, Sarah reacted with amazement. "Jack, you're not going to believe this," she said. "We just received a report about an illegal animal transport truck that overturned while trying to cross a flooded creek about 5 miles from your house. The police rescued some animals, but many are still missing." The pieces began to fit together in Jack's mind. Wildlife traffickers. That threat he had fought throughout his career was behind these cubs. The rain and the creek's flooding had given them a rare opportunity to escape. Sarah offered to pick up the cubs immediately, but Jack looked at Max, who had already laid down next to them, licking the mud from their fur with surprising dedication. "Sarah, we have a problem," said Jack. "Max has adopted them as if they were his own." He explained that the dog had developed a strong protective instinct toward them, and separating them immediately could cause stress to both Max and the cubs. Thanks to his experience with animals, he managed to convince her to allow him to care for them temporarily, at least for a few days, until they were strong enough to be transported. 3 days, Jack, no more," Sarah warned, "and I need daily updates." After hanging up, he began to check his old cabinets for supplies, bottles of carnivore formula, a first aid kit, and thick blankets. With the care of a surgeon, he prepared a warm and safe corner in the shed, using the softest blankets he found. When he returned, he found Max already settled next to the cubs, who were curled up in the most protected and warm corner. The dog was cleaning them with gentle, almost maternal movements. Jack had already named them, Leo and Tio. The little ones were sleeping deeply exhausted, with their bodies pressed against Max's, seeking warmth and security. Jack observed them with attention and affection. He wondered if 3 days would be enough. Looking at Max's firm eyes, he knew the dog had made a decision, and nothing seemed capable of changing it. The first night passed in constant vigilance. Jack slept in an old armchair inside the shed, waking with every small sound, prepared to intervene if something happened. But Max had everything under control, attending to every need of the cubs with an almost miraculous instinct. When Leo woke up, crying from hunger, Max didn't hesitate. He went to Jack and woke him with a slight push, guiding him toward the prepared milk bottle. With dawn filtering through the cracks of the shed door, Jack opened his eyes to find an unusual scene. Max had taken the cubs outside and with surprising patience was teaching them where to relieve themselves away from where they slept. Jack couldn't believe what he was seeing. He didn't think a dog could teach that type of behavior to lions. "All right, old friend," Jack said to Max, while the dog guided the little ones back. "We have 3 days, let's make them count." With dedication and experience, Jack transformed the shed into a temporary refuge. He evaluated the cubs. They were dehydrated, hungry, and scared, but didn't seem to have serious injuries. Max refused to leave them, even skipping his own meals to stay by their side. Jack watched in silence while Max licked the mud from their fur, motivated them to feed, and then taught them to move carefully on the wet ground. As the hours passed, he began to notice differences between the two. The older one had intense eyes and slightly darker fur, so he called him Leo. The smaller one was more restless and playful, so he called him Tio. Within a few days, both cubs were already responding to their names, something that surprised Jack with their intelligence. What followed during the subsequent days was something Jack had never witnessed in his entire career. Max was not only caring for the cubs, he was educating them. He taught them to move through mud without sinking, to stalk stealthily, even to clean themselves after playing. Leo and Theo imitated each of his movements, from how he lay down to the sounds he made. One morning, before the sun finished rising over the horizon, Jack woke up and saw Max in the yard, teaching Leo to stalk. The dog was crouched behind a bush, with only his eyes and ears visible. Leo imitated him, though clumsily. Theo, meanwhile, had no patience for the lesson and ran back and forth, his tail ruining any attempt at stealth. Jack began documenting everything in an old notebook. He understood that what was happening was a rare scientific opportunity, an interesting behavior rarely observed. He took photos and videos while Max taught his students to stalk and pounce toward an old pillow. Theo, always impulsive, would usually interrupt, forcing Max to start over with infinite patience. On the afternoon of the third day, right at the deadline Sarah had set, she returned to see how the cubs were doing. Jack led her to the shed, and the expression on Sarah's face was one of immediate amazement. Leo and Theo were no longer the weak and fearful creatures Jack had picked up. Now they were agile, curious, and confident. They wandered around Sarah's feet with the natural curiosity of felines, but maintained a prudent distance. Another lesson learned from Max. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah admitted while watching the dog teach them to cross a puddle without splashing. "He's not just caring for them, he's teaching them to be lions." Jack smiled with some sadness. He knew that moment would come. "I suppose now you're taking them away?" But Sarah, observing once more the scene before her, Max teaching Theo how to wash his face, while Leo stalked a beetle as if it were real prey, remained thoughtful. Something extraordinary was happening. Even with all her experience, Sarah had never witnessed anything like this. "I think we can extend the time a little," she finally said. "They're developing well, and there are experts who would be very interested in this." "But Jack, you know this isn't a permanent solution, right?" Jack nodded. He knew it better than anyone. Leo and Theo were lions, not pets. One day they would become powerful predators, impossible to keep in a shed. Sarah agreed to leave them one more week under the condition that a veterinarian examined their health. Jack gladly accepted, aware that each day strengthened the bond between Max and the little ones even more. The next day, the veterinarian arrived. It was Martin, an older man he already knew from his days at the rescue center. Martin couldn't hide his amazement seeing Max gently licking the cubs while teaching them to drink water from a bowl without spilling. "In 40 years of practice," said Martin with a voice full of incredulity, "I had never seen anything like this. It's not just protective instinct," commented Dr. Martin while observing Max interact with the cubs. "Your dog is teaching them, Jack. He's transmitting knowledge." Martin had finished examining Leo and Theo. He confirmed that both were healthy and in excellent development. In fact, he said they were progressing even better than many lion cubs he had examined in zoos and reserves. Maybe there's something in Max's rearing method that we should study more thoroughly, he added before leaving Jack with more questions than answers. What was initially going to be a 3-day extension became 2 weeks and then 3. During that time, Leo and Tio grew rapidly. Their small bodies began to show the contours of the majestic predators they were destined to be. Jack, aware of their growing needs, transformed part of the backyard into a safe play area. He placed logs for climbing, shaded areas, and even a small pool so they could learn to swim. One afternoon, when the cubs had been there for about 6 weeks, Jack witnessed something amazing. Max had placed a rabbit-shaped toy tied to a rope that Jack could drag from the center of the yard. The dog lay on the ground and indicated to Leo and Tio to do the same. Then, with slow and calculated movements, he began to approach the prey, stopping each time the toy rabbit moved. Jack, understanding the game, gently pulled the rope. Leo caught the lesson instantly. He imagined each of Max's movements with a precision that left Jack breathless. Tio, as always, was too excited to be patient. He jumped from his hiding place, scaring the rabbit, which forced Jack to pull the rope quickly. Max wasn't bothered. Instead, he patiently guided Tio back to his position, sometimes taking him gently by the neck, just as a mother lioness would do with her cub. After several attempts, Tio understood. Finally, all three managed to stalk and hunt the toy prey together. Jack documented everything. Notes, photographs, videos. He was building a detailed archive that he hoped would someday serve to improve conservation and rehabilitation programs for orphaned animals. He realized that what Max was doing was extraordinary. His methods could offer new perspectives on how to prepare animals to return to their natural environment. Each day brought a new lesson. Max seemed to understand that Leo and Tio weren't ordinary puppies. They were a different species, with very different needs and instincts. He adjusted his teachings with an intelligence that defied logic. He designed specific games to encourage natural hunting behaviors, but also taught discipline, limits, and control. Theo, always more focused and observant, quickly became the best student. He learned to move stealthily, to hide in the brush, to camouflage using his environment. Theo, more impulsive and playful, didn't stop learning either. Thanks to Max, he understood the value of teamwork and coordination during a hunt. The most curious thing was how Max also taught rules. He used soft growls to warn them if they played too rough or if they crossed some limit. As the cubs grew and their strength increased, Max taught them to control themselves. It was an essential lesson for creatures that would one day be elite predators. Sarah continued visiting them. At first, she did it weekly, then every 2 weeks. She brought specialized food and recorded the cubs' progress. Each time she returned, she was even more surprised by the progress and by the deep connection that had formed between Max and the little lions. Researchers wouldn't believe it if I weren't documenting everything, she told Jack while watching Max teach them to swim in a small yard pool. This challenges everything we think we know about animal behavior. When the cubs reached 10 weeks, something extraordinary happened. They began teaching things to Max. Leo, with his calm and curious character, guided the dog to new places he wanted to explore. Sometimes he even seemed to show him hunting instincts he had naturally, as if he wanted to share them with his teacher. Tio, with his inexhaustible energy and social spirit, invented games and encouraged Max to participate in them, jumping, running, and pushing him affectionately. Jack then understood that what existed between them wasn't a one-way relationship. It wasn't simply Max teaching. It was an exchange. An unconventional family, yes, but a true family after all. One with a complex dynamic where everyone learned, everyone taught, and above all, everyone cared for each other. Max was no longer simply a substitute father. He had become part of the small lion pack, and Leo and Tio had accepted him as a true member of their family. One night, when the cubs were close to turning 3 months old, Jack received a call from Sarah. Her voice was more serious than usual. "I have spoken with Dr. Rodriguez from the Sonoran Reserve," she said. "They've prepared a special area for Leo and Tio. They're old enough now to move, to live where they really belong." Jack. Jack hung up and stood looking out the window. Outside, Max was training the cubs among the desert bushes, teaching them to stalk carefully and stealthily. The dog had transformed into a wise and patient mentor, and the lions had prospered under his tutelage. But Jack knew Sarah was right. Leo and Tio weren't pets. They were lions. They needed to live among their own kind, learn what it meant to be part of a wild pack. "Tomorrow," Sarah said with a soft but firm tone, "we'll go in the morning." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. From his bed, he listened to Leo and Tio's games in the shed, Max's soft growls correcting them when they got too excited. He wondered if that would be their last night together, and if it was, did Max know what was about to happen? However special the bond between the dog and the cubs was, the reality was clear. Leo and Tio were growing rapidly. Soon they would be too big and dangerous to live in a domestic environment. However, what was also undeniable was the depth of the bond that united them. Separating them abruptly didn't seem fair or natural. The next morning, Jack woke up with an idea, a solution that could help everyone. He called Sarah and proposed something bold, a gradual transition process in which Max would be an active part of the lion's adaptation. "It's not crazy, Sarah," he insisted. "With my experience and the data we've collected, we could set a precedent. I want us to convince the reserve to try a special program. Max and I will be part of Leo and Tio's reintegration process. We'll make short visits to the reserve so they become familiar with the environment, with other lions, without breaking their bond with Max suddenly." Sarah, initially skeptical, agreed to review the records. Jack shared detailed notes, photos, and videos from recent weeks. After analyzing everything, she began to see the potential of the plan and promised to discuss it with the reserve authorities. A week later, good news arrived. The reserve accepted to conduct a trial of the special program proposed by Jack. With his wildlife experience, the solid documentary record, and the unique relationship between Max and the cubs, they saw an extraordinary opportunity to investigate lions' social behavior from a new perspective. The transition process began immediately. Jack and Max took Leo and Tio to the reserve on brief visits of just a few hours. At first, the cubs showed insecurity and stayed close to Max, reluctant to move away. But little by little, thanks to the dog's encouragement, they began to explore the new environment and interact with other lions in captivity. The most surprising thing was how Max understood his new role. He didn't try to keep them close to him. Instead, he seemed to understand that his mission was to help them integrate into their new world. He encouraged the cubs to relate to the others and watched them from a distance, intervening only when necessary. The reserve researchers began documenting every step. They were amazed by Max's emotional intelligence and Leo and Tio's rapid adaptation. Despite having been raised by a dog, both retained their feline instincts. It even seemed they had acquired unique skills they wouldn't have learned in a conventional pack. After 4 months of constant work, Leo and Tio had completely adapted to life in the reserve. They had grown notably. They were no longer the defenseless cubs soaked in mud that Max had brought home. Now they were part of a group of young lions, although some of their behaviors remained unique, reflecting their unusual upbringing. Impressed by the results and Jack's sensitivity toward animal behavior, the reserve invited him to collaborate as a special advisor in a new research program. Its objective: to explore the use of trained dogs in the temporary rearing of orphaned fauna. Max had not only rescued 2 cubs, he had challenged nature's logic, changed the course of 2 wild lives, and opened the door to a new form of conservation. The story of Max and the 2 lion cubs became a case study that changed how many experts viewed interspecies relationships. It provided new perspectives on the capacity to form emotional bonds beyond biological limits and how those bonds could positively influence the development of wild animals. During his last visit to the reserve on a rainy afternoon, Jack and Max stood next to the lion area. Under the soft drizzle, they watched in silence as Leo and Tio played in the mud, with other young of their species. Now they were strong, confident, healthy lions, very different from those fragile and fearful creatures Max had found months earlier. Suddenly, Max emitted a soft bark. As if they had been waiting for it, Leo and Tio stopped dead. They raised their heads attentively. Their eyes lit up as soon as they recognized the dog and Jack on the other side of the fence. Within seconds, they ran toward the fence, not with hostility, but with genuine joy, clumsy in their enthusiasm, as if for an instant they returned to being the cubs that played in the shed. Their bodies were already large, but their hearts still held the memory of who had raised them. Jack felt a tear run down his cheek. It wasn't sadness, it was the deep emotion of understanding that sometimes the most lasting bonds are born in the most improbable circumstances, and that true love doesn't always consist of clinging to someone, but in knowing when to let them go so they can become the best version of themselves. Max, standing next to Jack, also seemed to understand it. He observed Leo and Tio for a few more seconds, then lowered his head and turned, ready to leave. His mission was accomplished. He had saved two lives, raised them with dedication, and now knew it was time to let them go. While driving back home, Jack extended his hand and placed it gently on Max's head. "You did well, old friend," he whispered. The dog rested his head against Jack's palm, looking silently toward the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the desert mountains. It wasn't just the end of a day, but the beginning of something new, a new beginning for everyone.